Good morning. I thought I'd do a quick video on how I came to be living in a tiny car like this, by the sea, by the beach, as a digital nomad. So I suppose one early indication that I might quite like roughing it was when I was doing my GCSEs at school, so when I was 13, 14, 15. At night I used to go fox watching. So this was in South London where I spent a little bit of time. I would get up at the middle of the night, about 11, 12 o'clock in the evening, and go outside of my parents' house and walk along to this area of in Blackheath in London, where there were lots of urban foxes, and I got to know those foxes. And I'd go out probably 2 or 3 nights a week, and quite often by about 2 in the morning I'd obviously be pretty exhausted, so I'd dive in under a hedge in South London and go to sleep. Obviously my schooling suffered, but I was clearly getting used to the idea of roughing it and becoming a kind of a naturalist and pretty nomadic. Now that obviously meant I didn't do very well at school, so I kind of failed most of my GCSEs and didn't do A-levels. But I did start a little campaign group, and this is outlined in my book, Breaking Free. I started this little campaign group campaigning against a really harmful river engineering project, a flood alleviation project in London. And by doing that campaigning, I basically landed a little job with the organisation, the National Rivers Authority, Environment Agency now, who were planning that flood alleviation scheme. I was given a job, so despite my lack of qualifications, I did start out in a kind of an entry-level job in the career I wanted to pursue, which was relating to nature. So I did that job for a couple of years, and then I moved back to the Isle of Wight, where I took on another job advising farmers on kind of river-related stuff. And in those days I was living in my parents' house. I was kind of late teens, coming on to early 20s. And I did that for a little while on the Isle of Wight. Then I moved to Salisbury to start working for the RSPB, a wildlife organisation. And you can see that despite my lack of qualifications, I still managed to start to develop a career going down a path I wanted to go down. All very conventional. What I didn't do, as that career developed, I was with the RSPB for 10 years. What I didn't do was buy a house. I always lived in rented property, in shared houses basically. So yeah, a few years there at the RSPB, then I moved down to Exeter to carry on a slightly different job at the RSPB. But again, I just lived in a shared house there. And then things started to change, the cracks started to appear, because I relocated to Norwich, not returning to the Isle of Wight for a while, but I relocated to Norwich, where I took a part-time job with the RSPB and went to university to do a master's degree in ecology. Despite my lack of qualifications at GCSE and certainly not A-level, I was still allowed into University of East Anglia. And towards the end of that master's degree, I basically ran out of money, although I was still working part-time, and I was looking for ways of saving money. And what I decided to do was to sleep in one of the rooms on campus, the MSc room, a room for the year group, basically where we were supposed to be doing our studies. I bought a little roll mat, and there was electricity in that room, so I could have a kettle. And there's a little kitchen area that we could all use. Don't think there's a microwave, if I remember rightly, but no, there was a microwave actually, so I could cook as well. Yeah, that's right. So basically for about 6 months I slept in this little tiny room, basically an office, overnight and studied there during the day. And also for part of that time I actually had a tent as well, so sometimes I would put the tent up on campus outside and sleep in there instead, and I really enjoyed that. Then I finished the MSc, and by that time I was working for the World Land Trust, so a conservation organisation, and I went overseas to Cambodia for the dry season. I think that was 2013, and there I basically started to live in a hammock. And I was also doing field work, surveying large mammals out in a very remote piece of a dry deciduous dipterocarp forest, kind of monsoon forest, so wet during the wet season. I was there during the dry season, but when I was doing that field work I was living out in a hammock in a very remote field camp in the middle of a forest. So that was my first kind of real indication that I really like to kind of rough it and be pretty nomadic, living out in Cambodia basically on my own, well with a little field team, but managing my own kind of travels, and that was a really, really amazing experience, and it really gave me a kind of a bit of a bug for travelling around, being nomadic, living in fairly rough conditions, and I absolutely adored it. And I came back from Cambodia and just did a few projects around the UK, living in a conventional kind of accommodation. But then I went back down to the University of Exeter, so I'd got the masters, and I decided to start a PhD, which was fun. That's an ongoing saga, but in 2018 I was living in the Falmouth backpackers down in Cornwall, where the University of Exeter's Penryn campus is located, and began to run out of money again, so I bought a bivvy bag. A bivvy is obviously a kind of a sleeping bag style tent, so it basically looks like a sleeping bag but it acts like a tent in some respects. But I would unroll that each evening under a group of trees on campus where I couldn't be seen, and I would sleep in that, and then I would put it in the locker during the day. So effectively, when I was down in Falmouth for at least the 3 or 4 summer months, I was living outside in a bivvy bag and then studying on campus during the day, using all their facilities, showers and cooking gear, microwaves, that kind of stuff. It's perfect really, because I was barely spending any money, but I was living a pretty fun kind of lifestyle as far as I was concerned. But then winter approached and I went back into the Falmouth backpackers, so winter 2017, and then in February 2017 I was having this conversation with the landlady there, or the owner of the Falmouth backpacker, trying to discuss kind of options for finding a room to rent in a shared house somewhere that would actually work out cheaper than staying in the backpackers. And I looked at, actually right next door to the backpackers was this tiny cupboard size, kind of cupboard under the stairs size room to rent, which would have cost about £600 a month just for rent, and then bills on top of that. And I couldn't really afford that, didn't really want to be spending that kind of money, especially when I was studying for this PhD project. And then then Judy, the owner of the backpackers, turned around and said, well, I'm actually going to sell my van, or I want to trade in my van, she said at the time. She had a little Berlingo, and she was a surfer, kind of bodyboarder type, typical Cornish local, born and bred a Cornish lady. But in the back of her van, she had a mattress, or it was actually just a big sheet of foam over the bed of the van, and she would stick a surfboard in there, or a bodyboard really, a smaller bodyboard, and just crash. She'd drive around Cornish surfing spots and crash in the back of the van overnight. And she said, well, couldn't you just live in the van? You've lived in a bivvy, you've lived in a hammock out in Cambodia before, why not just live in a van? Because she, obviously being Cornish and a surfer girl, knew all about van life, and it had never occurred to me prior to this conversation. And her van, she said she would sell it to me. She was looking to trade it in to buy a new van, but she said she would alternatively sell it to me for £600, the same as a month's rent in the little cupboard room next door. And I jumped at it. I just bought it there and then, sealed the deal, and literally after about a half-hour conversation, I'd purchased a van, a little white Berlingo, Citroen Berlingo, and I moved straight into it that night. Well, what I first did was headed down to Trago Mills and purchased a burning stove, a cheaper, well, it was a duvet actually. I think I probably purchased a duvet and a sleeping bag because it was February, bear in mind it was February, and there was snow on the ground outside. It was one of the rare kind of longer cold snaps in Cornwall in February 2018. But anyway, I bought this kit, little camping stove, sleeping bag and duvet, and I slept in the van that first night. I woke in the morning, also bought a little kettle and water and tea making stuff. I woke the following morning, there was ice on the inside of the van, and I bought a kettle and it was absolutely superb. I was in my element, and that was February 2018, and here we are in the dying days of May 2025, and I still live in a vehicle. I lived in that van for 6 years, so it cost me £100 a year basically, that van, in terms of, you know, it cost me £600 to buy, and I was in it for about 6 years. Compare that to renting a room in a shared house and having to pay bills on top. So that's how I came to be living in a vehicle. The van lasted 6 years, and when was it? It was either the end of 2023 or the beginning of 2024. The van finally conked out on me. It could have been, you know, it was repairable, but I thought I just needed a new vehicle. So I lived in a hut for a couple of months after the van imploded, and I still had the van for storage, but it was stranded on a road, on a street here in Ventnor. So I slept in this hut that winter. Can't remember which winter it was. I think it was 2023, 2024. I slept in this hut for a couple of months over the winter. I liked that. It was very cold, but I enjoyed it. And then a friend of mine decided he wanted to sell his Citroen C1, which is a ridiculously tiny car, for £400, I think it was. So I bought that. I removed the passenger seat and the bench seat at the back, laid out a bit of plywood, put the bed from my Berlingo into the C1, and I had a new home, a tiny car, which is where I still am now in May 2025. So over a year in that little tiny C1. So that's how I came to, well, that's kind of how my nomadic lifestyle slowly developed. So the vast majority of my life, I'm kind of middle-aged now, the vast majority of my life I was in kind of shared accommodation, in rooms, rented rooms in accommodation with 2 or 3 other people, which was great. I never bought a house, so I'm kind of asset poor but time rich. So I've never bought a house, I don't have that kind of asset, which is a vulnerable position but also a freeing position to be in my view. And frankly, I don't want to live any other way. Lovely view here of Ventnor. Look at the mist over the over Ventnor Downs. Let's zoom in a little bit. That'll do. So, hope you've enjoyed my little overview of my backstory and how I came to develop a kind of a nomadic dirtbag kind of lifestyle and how it suits me down to the ground. So in future videos I'm going to outline how I intend to take this lifestyle forward. So currently I'm employed, so I'm working for a boss, but the plan is to develop multiple streams of income, online income, internet-based income, so I don't need to work for a boss. I can be my own boss basically, and it'll be fully location independent, that lifestyle, and I can basically live anywhere in the world with any luck. So do subscribe if you want to follow my journey, and there's lots of other videos about from the last 5 or 6 years I think on this channel, so you can see how things have developed over the years, and if you subscribe you'll see how my life develops over the next decade or 2 or 3, during which I fully intend to be fully nomadic, location independent, still living in a vehicle, but we shall see, won't we? Thank you for watching.